The funerals of American soldiers are always held with great solemnity. The burly man and his friends, all dressed in solemn attire, were bidding farewell to their comrade. Unexpectedly, at this very moment, he caught sight of a flash of light in the distance. In an instant, the cemetery transformed into a unique battlefield between Special Forces soldiers and assassins. Having just dealt with one assailant, he continued to pursue and eliminate the remaining assassin. This man's name is Jack Reacher, a high-ranking Special Forces soldier in the U.S. Army, who even leads a special team that handles difficult cases. Therefore, malicious individuals are always looking for ways to eliminate Jack. In fact, with his intimidating and burly appearance, even the police are apprehensive of Jack at first glance. For instance, even when Jack simply walked into a diner, he was the first to be targeted by the police. Faced with Jack's imposing physique, a sense of fear arose within the officers. Fortunately, Jack did not resist. He silently followed the police back to the station. The police searched him thoroughly, only finding $212 and a French medal from World War II. At this moment, an inspector unexpectedly emerged from the office. He took Jack into the conference room for a private interrogation. It was only then that Jack learned the reason for his arrest. At 12 o'clock last night, a murder occurred on the local highway. The victim was shot twice in the back of the head at close range. The perpetrator not only disposed of the remaining traces at the scene but also beat the victim after finishing the job. Finally, he used a piece of cardboard to cover the victim's body with satisfaction. This morning, a bus that was supposed to go straight to the town stopped near the crime scene. The person who got off the bus was Jack, who was visiting the town for the first time. Therefore, the police immediately arrested him. Upon hearing this, Jack, who had been silent, suddenly became excited. He pointed out to the inspector that 3 people were involved in this case. The first person was not only proficient in using a gun but also knew how to pick up the shell casings after committing the crime. The second person was a psychopath because only a twisted mind would beat the victim after the deed. The third person was a timid individual with social anxiety. Fearing exposure, he used a piece of cardboard to conceal the victim, seeking self-consolation. Although the inspector also believed that Jack had excellent reasoning abilities, this couldn't explain why he appeared near the sensitive area. Moreover, a piece of paper with a phone number was found in the victim's shoe. Before the police could identify the owner of the number, Jack could only be detained at the police station. But surprisingly, the police quickly found the owner of the phone number. It was a young bank employee named Pao. However, when the police found him for questioning, Pao saw a black car parked in front of his house. He suddenly became frightened. Before the inspector could finish his sentence, he confessed to being the murderer. "I did it, just lock me up." At this moment, the inspector realized that Pao was lying. But to confirm his suspicion, he decided to set a trap. "So you think I would believe that someone with no criminal record like you would suddenly cause trouble?" The inspector deliberately fabricated the victim's condition, stating that the victim had been shot with a hunting rifle and then burned. Unexpectedly, Pao nodded repeatedly. Rose, standing beside him, understood everything. This man had clearly been turned into a scapegoat. But according to protocol, they were obligated to take Pao back to the police station and release Jack, who had been wrongfully imprisoned for the past few days. However, the inspector didn't want to let Jack go easily. He believed that Pao confessed to exonerate Jack. Upon hearing this, Jack couldn't help but feel angry. He said that when Pao entered the police station earlier, he stared at Officer Steven for 2 seconds. This indicated that Steven definitely knew something. However, the inspector thought Jack was deliberately causing trouble. "It seems you are very confident in your deductions." "That's right, for example, I'm confident that you've been recently divorced and have just quit smoking." The suits the inspector wears are expensive, but his style of dress is completely outdated. This suggests he doesn't have a woman taking care of his attire, and coupled with the ring on his finger, it's highly likely he's recently divorced. Jack thought his words would convince the inspector, but unexpectedly, the inspector summoned Steven for a direct confrontation before believing him. It was then that everyone learned that Steven and Pao were cousins. Last night, they had a family dinner at home until 2 a.m. At the time of the incident, Pao was drunk and couldn't have committed the act. Yet, he groundlessly confessed to being the murderer. This indicates he definitely knows some related information. The inspector suggested detaining him in jail for a while, which would force him to come clean. However, no one expected that Jack, who had helped the inspector, would be falsely accused of assaulting a police officer and imprisoned alongside Pao. This was the first time either of them had been incarcerated in this jail. The officer on duty wanted to teach them a lesson they wouldn't forget. He used the pretext of a search, demanding they remove their clothes. But Jack threatened him back. If you don't want to get hurt, try it. Looking at Jack's tall and muscular physique, the officer had to back down. But life in prison is not like the outside world. Jack, tall and strong, naturally feared nothing. But Pow was just a weak scholar. In a prison without women, bookish boys like him attract a lot of attention. Immediately, a bully set his sights on Pow, approaching him and demanding his shoes. Then, he eyed the expensive gold-rimmed glasses on his nose. Seeing him cooperate like this, the bully was certain he had subdued him. Therefore, he prepared to proceed to the final step. But just then, a pair of legs suddenly appeared. Jack quickly materialized in front of Pow. With a few simple moves, Jack quickly knocked down the bully, frightening another into handing over his sunglasses. From that moment on, Pow became Jack's underling in prison. As a result, he revealed many truths to Jack. It turned out he was just a money manager at the bank. His boss not only forced him to manipulate financial fraud but also made him take the blame. He even threatened that if Pow dared to breathe a word, he would nail him to the wall and make Pow's wife and children witness his demise. At this moment, Jack suddenly noticed that the group opposite him seemed to be staring at him. To verify his suspicion, Jack decided to go to the bathroom. As expected, a group of people quickly rushed in. Moreover, some even carried weapons. Seeing this, Jack was not frightened but calmly put away his glasses. Jack fiercely beat the whole group, knocking down anyone he touched. In a flash, no one was left standing. By the time the warden received the report and arrived, he had no choice but to drag Jack away. However, the warden also asked in surprise why Jack was in the cell. Because they were only in custody awaiting trial, they should have been upstairs. After the warden left, Jack suddenly stretched out comfortably on the bed. Because he had finally released the pent-up frustration of the past few days. But Pow, beside him, was worried. After all, he couldn't defend himself like Jack. After his release from prison, he would surely face cruel revenge. At this time, Rose at the police station had thoroughly investigated Jack's situation. She was surprised to discover that Jack had not only received dozens of medals but had also handled over 150 cases after leaving the army, and had won them all. This is truly a formidable individual. We can't afford to offend him, Inspector. Rose then found evidence of Jack's alibi, successfully getting him out of jail. Naturally, Jack wanted to leave town immediately. But when he heard Rose say she wanted to invite him to dinner, Jack decided to stay for 2 more days. To prepare for the date, Jack specifically went to the barber to shave. However, at this moment, a luxurious pickup truck suddenly appeared outside. With a glance, Jack recognized that they were targeting him. He just didn't expect that this well-dressed young man in front of him was the eldest son of the Kraler Group, the largest local enterprise. And his purpose in coming here was only to warn Jack. Jack didn't want to cause any more trouble, so he prepared to go to the police station to find Rose. But at this time, Rose told him that dinner was cancelled because someone reported finding another body. The location was less than 40 meters from the previous crime scene. Unexpectedly, the inspector imprisoned Jack again, claiming that since Jack arrived in town, murders had occurred one after another. To clarify the situation, the inspector forced Jack to go to the autopsy with him. However, to his surprise, the victim was Joe, Jack's brother. Moreover, that evening, Jack was unexpectedly ambushed by a group of thugs. He turned around and warned the punks that it was best not to try anything funny today. But there was still a daredevil who threw a bottle at him. In a flash, anger surged within Jack. "You're in trouble now, you little punks." Without even warming up, Jack easily showed them what it meant to behave. At this time, Jack still didn't know that these thugs were just stalling for time. Because elsewhere, a group of 4 had sneaked into the police chief's villa. The next morning, everyone was shocked to discover the chief's wife lying in a pool of blood. The chief was stripped naked and nailed to the wall. The cruel method reminded Jack of what Pow had told him in prison. It was clear that the people who harmed the chief and Jack's brother were the same group. But what puzzled Jack was that to achieve their goal, they must have arranged for their own people to take the position of the new chief. Everyone knew that the inspector would be the next successor. So Jack couldn't help but suspect the inspector's involvement. But just then, Rose brought news. The inspector was not appointed as the new chief of police. The mayor was the one who actually took over. This news was like a bolt from the blue. Why would the mayor personally take control? To find his brother's killer, Jack and Rose went to Pow's house. But his wife said that Pow hadn't come home all night. What was even more peculiar was that Pow had never slept away from home before, and he hadn't even called. This made Jack suspect that something might have happened to Pow. So he immediately sought out Inspector Finley, hoping he could send someone to protect Pow's family. After finishing everything, Jack returned to Pow's house. However, that afternoon, Jack noticed a black car circling near Pow's house. He suddenly realized that this place might no longer be safe. So he asked Pow's wife and children to leave the villa immediately. But just then, a strange man suddenly rushed in. Jack immediately raised his weapon, only calming down after carefully checking the man's identification. It turned out that this man was sent by the inspector to protect them. Moreover, Jack only decided to look for the next clue after personally seeing Pow's wife and children safely get into the car. At this moment, Jack suddenly remembered the warden who had tried to intimidate him. He definitely had a problem. He and Pow should have stayed in the upstairs cell, but he arranged for them to be in a regular cell. Clearly, he had received orders to deal with them in prison. But unexpectedly, Jack was so skilled in martial arts. Even a dozen men were no match for him. So Jack decided to personally visit this warden to see if he could extract any useful information from him. But the warden was not panicked when he saw Jack arrive. Of course, he was fully prepared to deal with him. Two burly men threatened Jack with weapons and forced him into the trunk of a car. But seeing the two men standing so close to him, Jack had already devised a countermeasure. After dealing with one, Jack discovered the other was holding a combat knife. So he decided to play with him for a bit. Unexpectedly, Jack's opponent was not an ordinary thug. His grip on the knife and his fighting skills were all professionally trained, looking like a mercenary. Of course, in the end, he still fell under Jack's hand. Suddenly, police sirens wailed outside. Jack didn't want to cause himself any more trouble, so he turned and fled. To get to the bottom of the matter, that evening, Jack and Rose went to a bar on the outskirts of town to discuss. But as they were about to leave, a torrential downpour suddenly started outside. The only road home was flooded. They had no choice but to spend the night in a motel. Unexpectedly, this inadvertently saved their lives. The next morning, when the two returned to Rose's house, Jack suddenly discovered that someone had broken into her house. Not only were there many muddy footprints on the floor, but someone had also written threatening words behind the door. Jack knew that these people were definitely the real culprits behind the cases, but he didn't expect them to dare threaten the police. To ensure her safety, Rose followed Jack's advice and moved out. Before leaving, she gave Jack a pistol, the only gift her relatives had left her. Rose repeatedly told Jack to be careful when using it, but unexpectedly, Jack tested the hot item as soon as he left the door. "Oh my god, why are you shooting randomly? I have to try it to see if it works." At this time, the autopsy report results were available at the police station. After comparing DNA, they discovered that the victim who was killed with Joe was a truck driver. He had previously been involved in a lawsuit. What's noteworthy is that the company defending him was a high-end law firm. Of course, with the truck driver's financial capabilities, he certainly couldn't afford to hire them. So, Jack decided to go to the law firm to investigate. But just as he was about to leave, an administrative officer from the Secret Service suddenly called. As soon as she spoke, she inquired about Joe's situation. It was then that everyone learned that Joe was the director of investigations for the Secret Service. But when Jack reported Joe's death, the girl on the other end of the line suddenly burst into tears. No one expected Joe to be her boyfriend. Due to the special nature of his work, his girlfriend only knew that Joe was investigating a case of antique forgery. Naturally, she also agreed to help Jack print some documents related to Joe. Now, the direction of everyone's investigation was clear. Jack planned to go to the law firm to inquire about the deceased truck driver's situation. Meanwhile, Inspector Finley investigated and found the warden's home address. He decided to pay a visit personally. But when he arrived at the door, he discovered that no matter how much he knocked, no one answered. In a hurry, Inspector Finley decided to break down the door and barge in. However, he searched the entire house but only found a cell phone left behind by the warden. What was even more peculiar was that all recent calls were from the leading local enterprise, Kleiner Industries. At this very moment, two individuals rushed in and treated Finley to a hearty feast of fists. It turned out that before Inspector Finley broke down the door, the warden's neighbor had called the police. The local police mistook him for an intruder and therefore acted without hesitation. Fortunately, Rose arrived just in time to verify his identity and get him out of jail. Meanwhile, Jack had also arrived at the law firm. He straightforwardly requested that they print him a copy of the truck driver's file. But it seemed they weren't afraid of him at all. Seeing that a gentle approach wasn't working, Jack decided to resort to force. It seemed they only became obedient after being threatened. From the law firm's files, Jack discovered that Kleiner Industries had paid for the truck driver's legal fees. Inspector Finley also revealed that all of the warden's recent call records were to this company. It turned out this was the name behind everything. Jack and Inspector Finley decided to meet with the company's founder. However, as soon as they stepped through the door, Jack made a new discovery. Unexpectedly, the entire family were experienced drug users. Quickly, the two met with the head of the company. Unexpectedly, he had prepared everything. The boss claimed that the company defended the truck driver simply because they hoped he would return to work soon. As for the warden's calls, in reality, more than a dozen departments in the company shared the same phone number. Perhaps the warden had just invited an employee out for a drink. He even warned Inspector Finley that it was best to stop investigating his company immediately. Seeing him provoke him like this, Finley couldn't hold back any longer. "How dare you speak to me like that? I will put you behind bars." Inspector Finley's words were no different from a declaration of war against Kleiner Industries. He immediately ordered the security guards to throw the two of them out. That night, Jack went to a remote bar to look for the warden. Unexpectedly, as soon as he entered, he encountered a man even bigger than himself. This man declared that Spivvy was his friend and told Jack to inquire elsewhere. At this moment, Jack recognized with a glance that the man was a boxer. After a bit of massage, he confessed that the warden had actually fled with a few Spaniards. Thinking that was the end of it, Jack noticed a car following him as he left. Without hesitation, he got out of the car and went into the kitchen of the nearest restaurant to grab an extra pair of gloves. Then, Jack calmly returned to his car and accelerated towards a deserted road. It wasn't until the car reached a deserted farm that Jack jumped out and hid in the bushes by the roadside. At this time, the two assassins following him also arrived. They were all focused on the car ahead, completely unaware of the death lurking nearby. Just like that, the two assassins were countered by Jack. Of course, he had already prepared to handle the scene. Jack was also surprised to discover a large sum of money on the assassin, which he happily pocketed. Unexpectedly, when Jack opened the trunk of the assassin's car, he discovered the warden they had been searching for had also been killed. But at this moment, Jack couldn't care less. He skillfully smashed the assassin's phone, threw it into the car, and then arranged the bodies in the trunk. Seeing that one was too tall, Jack simply folded him in half. With a few more pushes, he fit nicely inside. Then, Jack drove the car to find Inspector Finley. The police had received a report that someone had dumped a dilapidated SUV there. The license plate had been removed, so its whereabouts were unknown. The inspector suspected that this was the car of Joe, Jack's brother, so he called Jack to confirm. Looking at the severely damaged car in front of him, it seemed hopeless, but Jack suddenly had a brilliant idea. He smeared ketchup on the car and then sprinkled some salt and pepper. Thus, the simplest metal cleaning solution was created. Quickly, they saw the car's VIN number, and they would soon be able to find the owner. However, what Jack didn't expect was that Rose suddenly asked him what had happened in Baghdad in the past. It turned out that before arriving here, Rose had been stopped by a young man at a gas station. Seeing that Rose was still attractive, he had ill intentions and deliberately brought up Jack's past. "You have no idea what horrible things he's done." Faced with Rose's question, Jack had to confess truthfully. At that time, he was still serving in the military. To pursue a deserter, they had approached Baghdad. There, Jack saw a group of children playing, each greeting him as they passed. However, one day, when Jack passed by again, he discovered that a group of local insurgents had committed a brutal act. So Jack eliminated them without hesitation. After hearing Jack's explanation, Rose also felt that he had done the right thing. At this point, the two decided to go to the airport to handle the gifts Jack had hidden in the trunk. Jack's first action was to climb onto the roof of the airport and quickly cut all the cables connecting the surveillance cameras. The security guard at the gate, seeing the screen go black, thought it was due to bird droppings causing a short circuit and quickly went out to check. Jack seized the opportunity to manually lift the barrier, while Rose quickly drove the car full of gifts into the airport. Furthermore, Rose quickly wiped away the fingerprints inside the car, took a knife, and removed the license plate. At this time, the security guard was still fiddling with the wires on the roof, completely unaware that someone had been added to the garage. Then, Jack and Rose went to rent a room at the hotel next to the airport. He also conveniently took a handful of toothpicks and inserted them into every gap in the door, even pulling an armchair against the door. Furthermore, Jack also drew the curtains tightly and moved the bed to an unusual position. If trouble arose, they would have more time to react. At this time, Joe's girlfriend unexpectedly called, informing him that she had prepared all the documents. They agreed to meet the next afternoon at a subway station without surveillance cameras. Afterward, Jack and Rose had a passionate night. Of course, the next morning, work continued as usual. The two went to the truck driver's house to investigate for clues. But to their surprise, when she heard the news of her husband's death, the truck driver's wife didn't show any grief, because she had known this day would come. How could a truck driver afford to have his whole family living in a 1,000-square-meter villa? There must be something fishy going on here. The wife even revealed that her husband had stolen air conditioners from Kleiner Industries and secretly transported them elsewhere. She even led them to her garage, where several boxes containing air conditioners were still left. Unexpectedly, after examining them, Jack astutely realized that these boxes were perfect for holding counterfeit money. Just as he finished speaking, the inspector suddenly called. It turned out they had traced the car that was dumped in the ditch to the one Joe had rented. Moreover, Joe had also rented a room at a nearby motel. Jack knew his brother would definitely leave clues in his luggage, so he rushed to the motel. Unexpectedly, the receptionist said that Joe had personally collected his luggage and clothes 20 minutes ago. Rose immediately sensed something was wrong, but Jack wasn't worried because, with his understanding of his brother, Joe would never leave clues in his luggage. Indeed, the person who took the luggage had thrown the useless clothes in the trash. Jack searched for a long time and finally found a piece of paper in the lining of the suit. Before he could examine it carefully, the assassins returned to pursue him. Jack deliberately held the piece of paper with the clue in front of his chest to attract their attention, then dashed through a shower of bullets. Of course, Jack was very fast, completely outpacing the pursuing vehicles. He even turned back and ambushed them, leaving a lasting impression. No matter how many people the assassins sent, Jack was fearless. Although the assassin also possessed martial arts skills, when faced with a formidable warrior like Jack, he was at a disadvantage. Just then, he grabbed a weapon nearby and immediately bounced back up. Fortunately, Rose arrived in time and quickly saved Jack's life. But when they read the clue, they discovered that Joe had used sign language. Helplessly, Jack had to call a former comrade, Negley, asking her to help decipher the numbers on the paper. What they needed to do now was to go to the subway station where they had arranged to meet Joe's girlfriend. The surveillance cameras at this subway station were old, making it suitable for a secret exchange of information. Upon arrival, they saw Joe's girlfriend exiting the subway station and then pointing up the escalator. Unexpectedly, after waiting for a while, they still didn't see her. Jack immediately sensed something was wrong, and everyone hurriedly split up to search for Joe's girlfriend. At this moment, Jack discovered Joe's girlfriend's backpack discarded on the tracks, the documents inside gone. Jack immediately guessed the tragedy that had occurred. Indeed, he found her lying unconscious up ahead. Joe's girlfriend called out her lover's name one last time before passing away in Jack's arms. Everyone knew this was the work of Kleiner Industries, but to avoid exposing their whereabouts, they could only leave the scene first and call the police. The next day, Jack suddenly discovered a secret button in the box containing the gun Rose had given him. Inside, a small key was hidden. This was a relic left by Rose's relative before his death, named Gray. Although Gray had never left a safe before he died, Jack suddenly remembered Rose mentioning that Gray often visited a barbershop every week. But why would a bald man go to a barbershop? It wasn't until they arrived at the barbershop that they discovered Gray had actually kept a safe there. The owner told them that Gray had instructed him to only give it to Rose when she came looking for it. Because what was contained in this box was Gray's files on Kleiner Industries. Everyone immediately divided the documents and began examining them. The inspector suddenly discovered that Kleiner had once purchased 116 cows at one time. Naturally, Jack noticed this immediately. Because once a farm has more than 120 cows, it becomes a commercial farm. Then, someone would come to inspect it every month. Especially since Jack had previously discovered that trucks were transporting large quantities of animal feed to the corporation. Over 100 cows couldn't possibly consume that much. There must be some secret hidden within. However, with only the evidence in hand, they couldn't prove that Kleiner Industries was printing counterfeit money. Jack could only rely on Gray's clues and mark his suspicions on the map. The town they were in had a favorable geographical location, with most roads leading to the port and not requiring passage through the highway. Overseas sales were their best method of transaction. But not long ago, due to the investigation by Joe and others, the government unexpectedly blocked the coast, so overseas customers couldn't receive the money in time. That's why all those who caused trouble were silenced by assassins. Both Jack's brother and Rose's relative had died for this reason. Obviously, the mayor was one of them, and he was even the one who had harmed Gray. In a fit of rage, Rose stormed into the police station. If no one had stopped her, she would definitely have sent the mayor to meet his maker. In the end, the inspector had to secretly take Rose to a house in the suburbs to avoid the mayor's revenge. Until the next day, Jack's former comrade, Negley, urgently contacted him. She had traced the origin of the phone number. It turned out to be the number of an inspector from the Memphis Environmental Protection Agency. Unfortunately, this inspector had also died while investigating the case, because that inspector had once discovered that the wastewater discharged by Kleiner Industries had polluted the entire downstream area. To protect the environment, he began investigating the company. Unexpectedly, this led to his demise. But coincidentally, a police officer in Memphis was also secretly investigating this matter. To find out the truth, Jack went to meet him. Unexpectedly, on the way there, the police officer in the front seat suddenly aimed his gun at his colleague beside him. It turned out that this police officer was afraid of retaliation, so he wanted to stop them. Naturally, Jack knew he wouldn't be spared. He forcefully kicked the front seat with both feet. The car lost control and quickly plunged into the river. With his extraordinary strength, Jack and Negley smashed the car windows and escaped. But the police officer inside the car wasn't so lucky. Realizing that investigating step by step would take forever, Inspector Finley single-handedly snuck into the Kleiner Industries office building. However, he witnessed a shocking scene. Unexpectedly, the person they had always suspected of leading the criminal gang was slumped over his desk, dead. It turned out he wasn't the most powerful person in this operation. The next morning, Inspector Finley informed Jack of Kleiner's death. What puzzled Inspector Finley was that they had always suspected Kleiner of hiring assassins, but now he had been killed as well. The mystery seemed to be growing. Of course, to find the truth, the two decided to continue monitoring Kleiner Industries. At this moment, Jack took out his binoculars and observed. He noticed that Kleiner's nephew suddenly got into a truck. There was definitely something fishy about making a delivery at this sensitive time. So they drove after him. It wasn't until the truck stopped for a rest at a roadside motel that the two secretly snuck onto the truck to investigate. Jack took on the task of climbing onto the roof of the truck, drilling a hole, and poking his head inside. Obviously, Jack suspected that it was filled with counterfeit money. However, at this very moment, Inspector Finley, who was keeping watch below, suddenly coughed twice. It turned out that the truck driver had heard a strange noise and came out to check. Jack lay still on the roof of the truck, not daring to move. Meanwhile, Inspector Finley played hide and seek with the driver. After confirming that there was nothing wrong, the driver turned and went back to the motel. The two finally breathed a sigh of relief. But at this time, Jack reported bad news to Inspector Finley. The truck was empty. There was no counterfeit money. Their operation had failed. At this point, Jack decided to call the professors who had collaborated with Joe. However, when the other end picked up, they sadly informed him that Professor Bryant had been killed. With no other choice, Jack had to call another number. Fortunately, this professor was still alive. The next day, Jack handed his weapons to Inspector Finley and boarded a plane to New York. To ensure the professor's safety, Jack had asked her to spend the night at the police station the previous night. Otherwise, she might also be silenced. It was then that Jack learned the truth about his brother's death. All U.S. currency paper was currently produced by a single company. The security around this company was even tighter than the Pentagon. Due to its special nature, it was nearly impossible to replicate. But Joe had discovered that someone was using other means to obtain this type of paper. And the production location was the town where Kleiner Industries was headquartered. At this moment, Jack suddenly understood how Kleiner was counterfeiting money. But now, he didn't have time to explain further to the professor. He immediately got up and left to continue his investigation. In the downtown area, Jack accelerated at the next corner. Seeing this, the assassin immediately followed closely behind. Jack had to navigate through the crowded residential area, leading him to a deserted alley. Seeing the assassin draw his weapon, Jack reacted quickly. He swiftly climbed over the stairs and picked up a discarded tire to attack. After a struggle, Jack successfully subdued the assassin. Then, Jack adjusted his attire and turned to leave the alley decisively. But he was completely unaware that an extremely brutal murder had just occurred on the other side of town. Officer Stephen and his wife had been eliminated in their own home. There were numerous mirrors surrounding their bodies. Jack knew instantly that the perpetrators wanted to extract information from Stephen, which was why they used this method to force him to confess everything. The inspector, on the other hand, believed that the deaths of Stephen and the previous police chief were both orchestrated by Kleiner Industries to eliminate loose ends. Although they had previously suspected Stephen of being a corrupt officer, at this moment, Jack dismissed that thought. He believed their target might have been Jack or the inspector. But both of them had been absent from town last night. Perhaps they assumed Stephen was their accomplice and therefore targeted him. At this point, they suddenly remembered that, excluding the janitor, there were only 3 police officers in this town. Rose was taking care of Pow's wife and children, while Stephen was dead. The only remaining inside man among the police was Baker, who was currently visiting residents. To confirm their suspicions, Jack deliberately invited Baker to dinner at a restaurant. First, he told Baker that he suspected the inspector was problematic. The corrupt officer planted by the murderer within the police station was most likely him. He also added that he would go to Pow's house tonight to search for clues. If he found evidence proving the inspector was corrupt, he would immediately inform Baker to expose him. However, to Jack's surprise, Baker agreed immediately. At this point, Jack was certain that Baker was involved, so he went to a grocery store and bought a suitable set of clothes and gloves. Then, he drove to Pow's house. Upon entering the house, he turned on all the lights and the TV to the maximum volume. Then, he took a bottle of army green paint and applied it to his face as camouflage. In this stormy night, Jack would conduct a grand hunt. Not long after, a pickup truck slowly approached the villa. 4 assassins in protective gear stepped out of the vehicle. The leader was Kleiner's nephew. They had received information that Jack would be coming here to search tonight, so they wanted to take this opportunity to eliminate him. Of course, they didn't know that the roles of hunter and prey had now been reversed. Then, one of them approached the villa and pried open the door. He signaled his accomplices to start searching for traces of Jack inside the house. But to their surprise, Jack had already set his sights on their driver. Jack showed no mercy or hesitation, dispatching the driver in just 2 moves. At this time, the assassins inside the house were still searching for Jack. Suddenly, one of them noticed the pickup truck outside flashing its lights. He thought the driver had some information to report, so he sent an accomplice out to check. But Jack had been waiting there for a long time. Jack acted decisively, quickly taking down the assassin. Then, taking advantage of the sound of the storm, he threw the body into the back of the pickup truck. Next, Jack entered the villa and silently eliminated a few more assassins. Finally, only 1 assassin remained. Naturally, this was also the most formidable opponent. Never had Jack taken so many hits. He even fell into the swimming pool and was nearly pinned down by the assassin, almost meeting his maker. Fortunately, at this moment, Jack spotted a firearm lying at the bottom of the pool. He immediately sprung up and turned the tables. After recovering, Jack collected all the fallen weapons on the ground and stored them in the trunk of his car. Now, all he wanted was to take a shower and rest. But unexpectedly, while changing clothes, he discovered that the paper Joe had left behind had been blurred by the rain. Suddenly, he thought of something and immediately called Rose. It turned out that Jack had figured out how Kleiner was counterfeiting money. The difference between US dollars and other currencies was that the size of the $1 and $100 bills were the same. Jack speculated that Kleiner must have mastered a certain technology. First, they exploited Pow's identity as a bank money manager to buy real $1 bills worldwide. Then, they used their self-developed technology to bleach them and print the desired denomination on them. But this process would generate a lot of waste, polluting the entire river. This also explained why Kleiner had eliminated the Environmental Protection Agency officer, as he must have discovered the clue. Then, Kleiner realized that discharging wastewater would arouse suspicion from the police, so they changed their waste disposal method. Previously, when Jack went to the auto repair shop to retrieve his car, he had seen an employee using kitty litter to clean up spilled engine oil on the ground. This was because kitty litter contained a large amount of absorbent adhesive. And animal feed also contained this compound. Therefore, to avoid arousing suspicion from the police, Kleiner raised 116 cows in order to legally purchase a large amount of animal feed. And because the number of livestock didn't reach 120, no one would come to inspect according to regulations. They only needed to bury the final waste in the ground on the farm. At this point, although they had a reasonable deduction, Jack and the others still needed direct evidence to report to the FBI and get them involved. He contacted the inspector to investigate further. But Inspector Finley suddenly discovered a group of assassins appearing at his door. Helplessly, Jack had to call and guide Inspector Finley on how to escape. First, he began frantically smashing the wall separating him from the next room. However, before he could break through the wall, he heard the sound of the lock being picked. He had to flee now and had no time to worry about anything else. Fortunately, the next room had a window leading to the side. Inspector Finley climbed through the window and hid in the shadows, observing the assassins. Waiting until they all entered the room, the man dashed towards his car. He hastily started the engine and stepped on the gas, speeding away. Before leaving, he didn't forget to deflate the assassin's tires. But the next day, when the two went to the witness's house, they discovered that the assassins had burned down the house on the same night Inspector Finley was being pursued. At this point, they decided to visit the witness's parents. Inspector Finley was surprised to find a box with the Kleiner Industries logo in the garage. Jack immediately cut the seal and dumped the contents of the box onto the ground. A large amount of cash quickly spilled out. Finally, they had the evidence to bring down Kleiner. Their efforts over the past few days hadn't been in vain. Jack asked Inspector Finley to quickly contact the FBI while he stayed behind to clean up the money. Once everything was ready, they agreed to meet at a cabin in the woods. At this moment, Jack suddenly received a call from Negley. It turned out that she had discovered the identity of the person who had killed the Environmental Protection Agency officer. Unexpectedly, it was an FBI agent. However, he had died of cancer not long ago. But he still had a partner, and this person was none other than Picard from the FBI. Jack couldn't believe that Picard, who had been helping them all this time, was actually colluding with Kleiner Industries. At this moment, Kleiner's son suddenly took out a video. The video showed Rose being handcuffed and threatened. Jack wanted to fight them desperately, but he could only suppress his anger. Because he knew that only by staying calm could he avenge his brother. So, under Picard's threat, the two set off to find Pow. Near evening, Jack asked Picard to take him to a restaurant. He briefly explained his reasoning, saying that Pow was most likely staying at a hotel somewhere in town. After all, his family was still there, so he wouldn't dare to run far. Just then, the waiter brought out dessert. Seizing the opportunity, Jack knocked over the coffee cup in front of him. While everyone's attention was diverted, he quickly grabbed a fork. Then, as he left, he plunged the fork directly into the rear tire. Waiting until late at night, Jack told Picard that the tire must have been flat. They couldn't drive to town like this. With no other choice, Picard had to let Jack stop the car by the roadside. Naturally, Jack was the one who got out to change the tire. Fortunately, the weapons he had confiscated from the assassins previously finally came in handy. But before he could finish, Jack discovered that Picard had disappeared. Chasing him wasn't a priority right now. So Jack immediately drove to a hotel in town to find Pow. It turned out that after searching everywhere, Jack discovered that only this hotel didn't require registration. Of course, Jack quickly returned to rescue Inspector Finley as well. He sent a message to the corrupt police officer and then suddenly drove his car straight through the door. Just like that, Jack sent him straight to heaven. After rescuing Inspector Finley, Jack immediately called on his comrades to gather weapons from the police station. Because tonight would definitely be a sleepless night, Jack would lead a direct assault on Kleiner Industries. As for Negley, she had already set up a sniper rifle outside the factory. In the blink of an eye, the two patrolling guards met their ancestors. The guard on the other side heard the noise and was about to investigate when Jack rushed over and dealt a blow to his waist. The threat outside the factory had been eliminated. To create chaos and rescue the hostages, Jack poured gasoline at the back entrance of the factory. But as he was about to light it, the inspector stopped him. Unexpectedly, Inspector Finley took a pack of cigarettes from the guard's body. He said that he had quit smoking for many years. If today was the final battle, he had to indulge himself once. Jack also lit the cigarette for Inspector Finley. Taking a deep drag, Inspector Finley threw the cigarette directly into the factory. Immediately, flames erupted fiercely, engulfing the interior of the factory in chaos. Taking advantage of this opportunity, Jack and his comrades launched their attack. He and Inspector Finley engaged in guerrilla warfare on the ground, while Negley provided cover from above. As an elite veteran, dealing with these villains was like a tiger entering a flock of sheep for Jack. At this time, in another corner of the factory, Pow finally found his two children. But as he was about to unlock the door, a burly man suddenly appeared. With the strength of a father's love, he bravely fought back for the first time in his life, then hurriedly led his children to safety. Jack also quickly found Rose and Pow's wife being held captive. After untying Rose, Jack handed her a weapon. Rose was an excellent policewoman after all. She showed no mercy to these villains. After escaping through the emergency exit, Pow's wife finally reunited with her long-lost husband. However, at this time, Rose returned. She wanted to fight alongside Jack and the others until the end. Whether it was fate's irony or not, all three of them encountered their respective enemies. In a hidden corner, Inspector Finley ran into Picard. The sudden attack caught him off guard, putting him at a disadvantage in the duel. But at this moment, he noticed the bullet wound Jack had inflicted on Picard. At the same time, Rose also encountered the mayor. Faced with the murderer of her loved one, Rose had long wanted to deal with him. Naturally, the mayor, who was over 50 years old, was no match for her. Rose quickly finished him off. Then, Negley called for them to retreat from outside. The smoke inside the factory was too thick, they had to evacuate immediately. Now, only Kleiner's son and Jack remained inside. The two fought within the smoke-filled factory. But at this moment, Jack realized he was out of ammunition, so he devised a plan to lure Kleiner's son out for a one-on-one confrontation. With Kleiner's weak physique, he was no match for Jack. Just like that, Jack avenged all those who had died, including his brother. Because Kleiner's son was the mastermind behind everything. After the smoke cleared, he stepped out and embraced Rose tightly. Everything that had happened during this time had finally come to an end. Naturally, Rose hoped Jack would stay in town and help her rebuild everything, but Jack declined, explaining that he was used to a nomadic life. He buried his grandfather's medal under the bridge where his brother died, then continued on his journey. Jack thought he would have a peaceful trip this time, but no. One fine day, as he was withdrawing money, Jack suddenly noticed something strange. The balance on the receipt stopped exactly at 10:30. This number was a distress signal used in the military before. Jack immediately felt something was wrong. He rushed to a clothing store to borrow a phone and contacted his former comrade, Negley, in New York. Unexpectedly, his friend informed Jack that their former colleague, Francis, had been murdered. This news left Jack shocked and enraged. Immediately, Jack went to meet Negley at a restaurant. It had been almost 2.5 years since they last saw each other. Negley quickly told Jack what she knew. It turned out that Francis had suddenly disappeared about a week ago. He had called Negley once, but they were both busy with work and couldn't talk much. Unexpectedly, just 2 days later, the police found Francis in the mountains. What was even more peculiar was that Francis had been severely beaten before being thrown out of a helicopter and falling to the ground. Jack knew for sure that some hidden force was behind this. But to avenge their former comrade, they still decided to secretly investigate. As they left the restaurant, Jack keenly realized that they seemed to be being followed. In the car, Jack tried calling their other comrades, but strangely, no one answered. Negley boldly speculated that they might have also met with misfortune. But currently, they didn't have many clues. They could only go to Francis' studio to investigate first. But when they arrived, they were both stunned. The room was completely ransacked. The legs of tables, chairs, and the bed were almost all broken. It seemed that the perpetrators were trying to find something important in Francis' office. At this moment, Negley noticed a broken picture frame on the ground. This was the only photo of the entire special investigation team led by Jack. However, before they could reminisce, Negley suddenly noticed a post office across the street. They then remembered Francis' extremely cautious personality. If he wanted to store something important, he would definitely put it in a safe and easily accessible place. The two immediately went to the post office to check. Negley pretended to be a stamp collector and chatted with the receptionist to distract her. Taking advantage of this opportunity, Jack opened Francis' mailbox. Sure enough, there were many documents and files inside. They immediately returned to the car to examine them. In a small bag, Jack found an encrypted USB drive. Clearly, there was some important clue inside. But Negley suddenly discovered that her laptop didn't seem to be compatible with this USB port. She had to go buy an adapter. They agreed to meet at the hotel in the evening. Unexpectedly, as soon as Negley opened the hotel room door, she noticed something unusual. Damn it, something's wrong. It turned out that the room had been ransacked, and some furniture was even damaged. Suddenly, there was a noise from the other bedroom. Jack realized that someone was definitely inside. So he signaled Negley to cooperate with him. Only after seeing the other person clearly did the three of them breathe a sigh of relief. It turned out to be just a false alarm. This was also a former member of Jack's investigation team, named O'Donnell. Jack couldn't reach him before, so he left a message for him on his voicemail, which is why he appeared here. Back then, he and Francis were the closest. This time, O'Donnell only said one sentence upon arriving. So, who do we need to take down? Negley's first action was to plug the USB drive into her laptop. But she didn't expect Francis to have set 3 layers of security. They had to enter 3 passwords within 2 minutes. If they were all wrong, the files on the USB drive would be automatically deleted. At this moment, Negley saw Francis' keychain. It had the logo of his favorite sports team. And he often mentioned a star player on that team. Not daring to hesitate, they immediately tried entering the star player's name. Unexpectedly, it was wrong immediately. Next, they tried Francis' favorite singer's name, but it was still wrong. At this point, O'Donnell suddenly had a crazy idea. He typed Jack's name on the keyboard. Are you crazy? He calmly explained. Before joining the team, Francis cut his hair like yours and talked like you. It's very likely he idolized you. Unexpectedly, the password was indeed Jack's name. Then, they printed out all the documents and discovered a list that all started with the letters AM. And based on the other documents, the enemy they had to face might be even more powerful than they imagined. Therefore, they decided to gather their former investigation team. O'Donnell knew that Swan from their team was living in another district. They decided to visit him. But after knocking on the door several times, there was still no response from inside. Jack didn't want to waste any time, so he directly picked the lock. However, the strange thing was that as soon as they stepped inside, a foul smell wafted up. They searched the entire house. Finally, in the bathroom next to the kitchen, they found Swan's pet lying there, dead from hunger and thirst. Jack knew that with Swan's personality, he would definitely not forget to feed his dog. He immediately understood that his comrade might have met with misfortune. First Francis, then Swan. Jack suddenly had a bad feeling. I think someone is trying to eliminate our entire special investigation team. Unexpectedly, just as Jack stepped outside, he spotted a suspicious person following him. Immediately, he charged forward and beat him to a pulp. Jack thought this bald man was one of the people who had harmed his comrades, but unexpectedly, Negley found a police badge on him. Helplessly, they had to drive away from there. Because once that police officer woke up, he would definitely issue a citywide warrant for Jack's arrest. At this moment, Negley suddenly remembered something. Finally, I remember where I saw him before. It turned out that the police officer Jack had just beaten up was the inspector in charge of investigating their comrade's case. Although they didn't know whether he was an enemy or a friend, Jack's attack was too blatant. To ensure their safety, they had to rent an old car that wouldn't attract attention. At this moment, Jack's eyes suddenly filled with affection. He walked straight towards a woman pulling a suitcase. Jack asked her how the undercover work was going. It turned out that this woman was also a member of Jack's special task force. After leaving the army, Dig had been working undercover for the FBI. From her eyes, it wasn't hard to see that Dig had a secret crush on Jack for a long time. She had also received news of Francis' death and came here to join the others. Then, they rented an old car and set off for Atlantic City, where their two remaining comrades lived. However, they didn't know that the real culprit had been following them and continuously reporting to the mastermind. That day, they arrived at their comrade's office in Atlantic City, but this place was also ransacked like Francis' office. At this moment, O'Donnell found a group photo of their team. And Jack discovered that the big, burly man named Sanchez kept many commemorative photos, including one of him with a girl at a bar. Jack knew at a glance that the relationship between the two was not simple and invited everyone to that bar. They split into two teams, one entering the bar and the other staying outside to keep watch. Once inside, Jack immediately showed the photo and asked about the whereabouts of the woman in the picture. The woman told them that Sanchez had met with two other comrades a week ago, and she had even taken a photo of them. The person surrounded by Sanchez and Oros in the photo was clearly Francis, who had been killed not long ago. Jack speculated that the three of them might have been investigating a case. However, when Jack asked, Sanchez's girlfriend insisted that she knew nothing about it. Why didn't you just ask Francis directly? Unfortunately, he was thrown out of a plane. After learning of Francis' death, Mina thought that something might have happened to Sanchez as well, and tears streamed down her face. But this suddenly reminded her of something. She recalled that the last time she saw Sanchez, he seemed to be muttering something on the phone. He said 65,100,000 per game. I don't understand what he meant. These numbers sounded very similar to gambling bets. And after leaving the army, Sanchez and Oros worked as security guards for a local casino. Without hesitation, Jack and the others immediately went to the casino to find the owner. Thanks to Sanchez's good relationship with the owner when he was alive, he was very cooperative with Jack. But strangely, the figure of $65 million didn't appear in the books. A thorough investigation would require more time. Therefore, the kind owner arranged a luxury suite for them. That night, after everyone settled in, Dig and Jack couldn't sleep. They decided to go to the casino to unwind. After earning a small amount of money, they were about to leave when Dig keenly noticed a man with a scar secretly observing them. Moreover, when they left the casino, two suspicious burly men immediately followed them. At first, they thought they were robbers, but Jack noticed that the car parked in front of them had a temporary New York license plate. He knew these people were assassins sent by the mastermind. But at this moment, the opponents had the upper hand. To avoid trouble, Jack led Dig to climb over the wall and run into the construction site next door. Seeing that the prey was about to escape, the scarred man immediately led his men in pursuit. However, they didn't know that this newly started construction site would become the grave of these foolish assassins. Sure enough, as soon as the assassin looked up, he discovered Jack climbing to the top of the scaffolding. The assassin thought Jack was scared and wanted to run away, so he took out his knife and followed. But how could he know that Jack was hiding in the shadows, waiting for the right moment? The assassin fell flat on his face and then started fighting with Jack on the rooftop. Although the opponent had a weapon, Jack was imbued with the spirit of martial arts. All the interactive objects around him became his weapons. Just like that, he dealt with one. At this time, on the other side of the construction site, two assassins were still searching for Dig. But they didn't expect this tigress to dare to attack proactively. After all, she was also a member of Jack's special investigation team. Dig quickly took down one assassin and even took the opportunity to use his back to shield herself from the bullets. When Jack arrived to help, the fight was almost over. Seeing that the last assassin still refused to surrender, Jack broke his leg and pressed his face into the freshly mixed cement. Of course, they took the car keys from the assassin before disposing of the scene. Unexpectedly, when searching the assassin's car, Dig found a lot of files about the special investigation team on the passenger seat. It seemed that Jack's guess was correct. The opponent was really targeting them. At this moment, Jack discovered the cell phone the assassin had left in the car. There was a phone number that had been frequently dialed, so Jack directly called that number. As soon as he heard Jack's voice, the other party knew something was wrong and threatened. "You've messed with the wrong person. You better prepare for your funeral." "Really? Then why is your voice trembling?" Since the phones on both sides were disposable, they couldn't be tracked. Jack thought the clue had been cut off here. However, unexpectedly, Dig found a card at the car door. A parking pass for the New Age company. Clearly, this was the clue they needed to follow. But too much had happened tonight, so they decided to go back to their room and rest first. The next morning, as they were preparing to exchange information, there was a sudden knock on the door. O'Donnell went closer to check and saw that it was the casino owner, so everyone lowered their guard. However, this time, the owner brought bad news. The police had discovered two victims on the outskirts of town this morning. Jack recognized them at a glance as his two comrades. Now that two more people had been killed, Jack was furious and decided not to sit still any longer. He went to the gun store and bought 4 guns and 3 disposable phones. This blatant act confused the owner for a moment, but when he saw the pile of money Jack threw down, his attitude immediately changed 180 degrees. However, Jack didn't expect that just as their car started, the sound of police sirens suddenly blared from behind. Helplessly, they had to stop the car. The police officer approached and ordered them to stay where they were. Jack seemed to anticipate what was about to happen, so he handed the gun to his comrade in the back, then reclined his seat, intending to take a nap right there. Indeed, as expected, this was the officer sent by the previous one. Jack guessed that he would have to spend some time in jail for assaulting a police officer, so he handed over the task to his comrades. Unexpectedly, the bald officer didn't make things difficult for Jack. He said that if they wanted to find out the truth, it was best to exchange the information they knew. The officer took out the documents that the police had collected at Francis' office. It recorded a conspiracy to attack, and the suspect's name also began with the letters AM. However, what surprised Jack was that the police had not only identified Am's location but were also about to arrest him. To speed up the investigation, the officer released Jack and prepared to investigate in 2 directions. That evening, Jack returned and received Negley's update on the information they had investigated at New Age Company. It turned out that the company director had given them a piece of paper with the address of the parking pass holder. Everyone agreed that the other party had definitely set a trap at that address. But how could they catch tiger cubs without entering the tiger's den? Jack still decided to meet with the assassins and see if he could find any new clues. First, Jack created a homemade incendiary bomb and threw it into the room in front of him. The flames immediately erupted fiercely, and some assassins who couldn't react in time were burned to ashes. Taking advantage of the chaotic scene, Jack led his comrades in and began to clean up the remaining assassins. 2 shots to the body, 1 to the head. Even a miracle doctor couldn't save them. Although things went smoothly for Jack, his 2 other comrades carelessly fell into the assassin's trap. Dig thought she had taken down her opponent, but the assassin pretended to collapse and then suddenly counterattacked. O'Donnell, hearing the noise, ran over to help but was blocked midway. Perhaps because they hadn't been in battle for a long time, the 2 were evenly matched against these small fry assassins. O'Donnell was even almost sent to heaven by the opponent. But luckily, he carried a switchblade. Taking advantage of the opponent's pain, he quickly regained the upper hand and eliminated the assassin in the blink of an eye. At this time, Dig was still fighting with her opponent, neither gaining an advantage. Fortunately, O'Donnell arrived in time to assist. After clearing the entire building, Jack suddenly noticed a suspicious car starting across the street. He immediately rushed out to chase the car that had just started. Seeing this scene, Negley didn't hesitate either. She ran to the rooftop at top speed, acting as a human radar for Jack below. "Jack, go west." Upon receiving the information, Jack immediately accelerated. He overcame obstacles and reached the location where the car was about to pass. To stop the car, Jack picked up a trash can and threw it straight ahead. The trash can accurately hit the car's windshield. However, when he ran over to question the mastermind behind it all, the man suddenly clutched his chest. After all the trouble they went through to catch a live one, the opponent suffered a heart attack and went to meet his maker right there. Although they didn't obtain any useful information in the end, at least now they could confirm that the mastermind was from New Age. But at this moment, the officer reported bad news. The police had failed to arrest AM. The opponent's counterintelligence capabilities were extremely strong. They had turned the tables on the police. However, there was even worse news. Jack's group suddenly discovered that their comrade Swan, whom they thought was dead, had worked at New Age. And based on the current situation, it was very likely that Swan was on the opposing side. The comrade who had once fought alongside them might now be their enemy. Although Jack didn't believe Swan would betray them, there was no concrete evidence at present, so everyone had to examine each piece of collected information. At this moment, everyone noticed in the New Age employee handbook that Swan's position was deputy director of the security department. And the director standing next to him seemed to be the person who had spoken to Jack on the phone earlier. Moreover, they also saw in the files a project called Little Wayne, which had just been approved in the defense budget vote. A senator had strongly supported this project, and he surely knew some confidential information. However, gaining access to the senator wouldn't be easy. Fortunately, O'Donnell's post-military career leaned towards this area. According to the information O'Donnell had gathered, the senator had a legislative assistant who was a spoiled and dissolute young man. He had been arrested by the police multiple times for using cocaine, but in the end, all charges were dropped thanks to his parents' money. O'Donnell found out that he would be attending a concert in Boston tonight, so they decided to set a trap for him. The group changed their clothes and went to the concert. Dig pretended to be a naive girl and approached the young man. She deliberately bumped into him and apologized. Seeing the attractive woman in front of him, the lecherous man immediately agreed to let her sit next to him. Of course, he couldn't have imagined that the best hunter often appears as prey. By the end of the performance, Daniel was completely smitten with Dig. With just a few words, Dig invited Daniel into her car. She took out the prepared cocaine and tempted him to take things further. Just then, a police badge suddenly appeared on his car window. But upon arriving at the police station, the inspector tricked the young man into believing that his name had triggered an FBI alert, and therefore FBI agents would come to talk to him. Unexpectedly, these FBI agents were actually Jack and O'Donnell in disguise. Of course, they knew that politicians like this young man wouldn't breathe a word before their lawyer arrived. So O'Donnell called his wife and told her that he was having an affair. Playing such a dirty trick, the young man naturally confessed everything. Jack immediately questioned him about the information related to the Little Wing project. The more he asked, the more horrified he became. Little Wing turned out to be a super advanced missile tracking technology. It was developed by the New Age Technology Company in New York and then manufactured at a factory in another region. Missiles equipped with this technology had a hit rate of up to 90%. And it could even be used for shoulder-launched missile launchers. New Age had bribed the senator to approve the funding for this project. At that moment, Jack suddenly realized that the $65 million they had investigated earlier was most likely the money used to purchase missiles. And his comrades had been silenced for uncovering this crime. If they actually managed to sell the missiles to terrorists, horrific events would occur. To prevent this from happening, Jack immediately decided to go to the manufacturing plant to investigate further. However, unexpectedly, as soon as they left, they were blocked by a group of thugs armed with weapons. Seeing that the opponents had weapons, Jack and the others naturally had to temporarily submit. But with his sharp observation skills, he noticed that the opponents didn't seem to dare use firearms in a crowded place. And if that was the case, it was nothing to Jack. His group was the special task force that had gone through countless more intense situations than this. After dealing with the amateur assassins, Jack took out a cell phone from the leader and directly called the director. Realizing that Jack was not easy to deal with, the director wanted to bribe him with money. "I'll give you anything you want. I want to throw you out of a helicopter." Jack acted without hesitation. The next day, he took O'Donnell to the FBI and sought out the agent who had worked with his brother, Joe. With the agent's help, Jack found AM, the intermediary between the director and the criminals. He also discovered that all of AM's transactions used anonymous bonds. Therefore, he couldn't let anyone else transport the bounty. This was Am's fatal weakness. After obtaining the information he needed, Jack prepared to meet with his other comrades. But halfway there, he was stopped by two black commercial vehicles. It turned out that these people were sent by the senator after he learned that Jack was interfering with his business. Jack was taken to the lounge of a zoo, as this location could avoid all surveillance and prying eyes in the bustling city of Washington. The senator didn't hide anything and spoke directly to Jack. He knew that Jack had once brought down a top corporation in another town, so he hoped that Jack could do the same in New York. After all, the senator had wholeheartedly supported the missile project. If these missiles fell into the hands of terrorists and attacked the United States, he would also be caught in the quagmire of public opinion, making it difficult to turn the tide. For the benefit of both sides, the senator said he was willing to support Jack to the best of his ability. After you're done, I guarantee that no one will be able to prove you were involved in this. Just do your best to wipe them out, leaving no one who can threaten us. Then you can continue wandering, and no one will be able to find you. We'll still be friends. In the senator's words, there were actually some other hidden meanings, which Jack only realized in the end. After the secret meeting ended, Jack received a call. O'Donnell informed him that the police had finally returned Francis' body. We had to go back to New York for the funeral. At this time, Jack suddenly noticed the officer giving a gift to Francis' son. Perhaps he wanted to comfort the child, but Jack thought he had other intentions. But since they were at a funeral, Jack didn't argue with him much. However, when the honor guard began firing their salute, Jack suddenly spotted a flash of light in the distance. Immediately, Jack shouted to everyone, "Get down!" The panicked crowd scattered, but Jack's group not only didn't retreat but also fired back towards the source of the sound. They used the tombstones as their shields, getting closer and closer to the assassin's position. Jack determined that the opponent had two snipers positioned diagonally. Due to the limited range, Jack decided to act as a decoy to attract the enemy, creating an opportunity for Negley, the best sharpshooter in the group. Seeing his comrade fall in front of him, the surviving assassin panicked and fled. Jack also rushed to chase after the surviving assassin. But climbing mountains and hills was not his forte. Soon, the opponent outpaced him and got into a car. Fortunately, at this critical moment, the officer arrived just in time. Jack didn't hesitate and immediately got into the car, pursuing the assassin on the highway. However, at this moment, Jack helplessly realized that the officer's driving skills were truly problematic. Jack directly grabbed the steering wheel from him and stepped on the gas, driving straight onto the shoulder at the bend. Anyone can accelerate on a straight road, but taking a corner quickly is the real skill. Jack crashed straight into the assassin's car. But when the two approached the car door, they discovered that the assassin had completely lost the will to resist. The officer wants to arrest him for questioning, but Jack believes these people attacking them in broad daylight means their backer is desperate. Bringing the sniper in would be a waste of time and give the enemy a chance to regroup. The officer asks in surprise, "What are you going to do then?" "Just take care of him right here to save time." At this moment, the assassin frantically winks, trying to signal something. Jack knows the director sent the assassin and wouldn't pay the full amount up front. He asks about the location of the subsequent transaction, but the sniper insists. "Someone named Swan hired me. I honestly don't know any director." Jack is stunned. He can't believe Swan would betray them. To clarify the situation, Jack attaches a listening device to the assassin and lets him go to the transaction location. But as the assassin opens the door to the room, a massive explosion erupts. Afterward, the group gathers at the park to discuss. O'Donnell is adamant that Swan has betrayed them. As Jack is about to argue, the officer arrives, informing them that the police only found the assassin's body at the scene. It is clear that the mastermind wanted to lure Jack's group in and eliminate them there. Jack suddenly remembers the blonde employee from New Age. The first time they were attacked, they went to the location she provided. Jack believes she might know something and sends Negley to the blonde employee's house to inquire. But as soon as they enter, they find the house in disarray. The wardrobe and cabinets are wide open. Negley suspects a kidnapping, but Dick keenly notices that the toothbrush and toothpaste are missing from the bathroom sink. If it were kidnappers, they certainly wouldn't care about the hostage's oral hygiene. This indicates that the blonde employee knows something and has hurriedly packed up and fled. Later that evening, they find her abandoned car. Though she has escaped, Jack believes she had grabbed something to eat before leaving. They check the security cameras at a nearby convenience store. Sure enough, she bought a hot dog and a sandwich there. Her daughter is holding a game console with internet access. Negley recalls seeing a lot of game discs at the blonde employee's house during the day. They hadn't considered that game discs could be used for tracking. Shortly after, Negley successfully pinpoints the address. The blonde employee is hiding at her lover's house. Jack's group quickly arrives and subdues the thin man. Faced with a direct threat, he has no choice but to call his girlfriend out. However, when questioned, the frightened employee insists she knows nothing. "When you came to the company looking for me, our security director was terrified. He told me to give you that address." She also reveals that Swan is the one who wants to stop all of this. If this woman's words are true, then Jack's speculation is correct. Swan hasn't betrayed them after all. But to confirm, Jack tells her to call the director immediately. Because Jack knows the director is the one who will eliminate any loose ends. If he knows the blonde employee's location, he will definitely come personally to deal with her. To meet this mastermind, Jack instructs the employee to set up a meeting with him. As expected, the director quickly took the bait. Jack immediately went to find the officer, but the purpose of this trip wasn't to recruit him. Instead, he wanted to entrust the employee's daughter to the officer's care. After all, the child had done nothing wrong, and Jack hoped the officer could take her somewhere safe to hide for a while. After receiving a firm confirmation from the officer, they immediately went to the train station to meet the director. Jack instructed the employee to conceal a listening device in her bag and told her that as soon as the director's car approached, they would take him down. In the drizzle, the director's car slowly pulled into the station. But just then, Jack received a call from the officer. It turned out that the officer was planning to drive the employee's daughter out of the city that night, but as soon as he started the car, assassins sent by the director found them. The officer, aware of his poor driving skills, could only call Jack for help. Unexpectedly, the employee, who was acting as bait, also overheard this. Her worried expression immediately alerted the director to the trap. Both sides acted sooner than anticipated. Negley, sensing the situation was amiss, quickly started the car, trying to get her comrades out of the train station to help the officer. However, Jack believed this was the best opportunity to eliminate the director, so he decided to stay behind and carry out the assassination alone. After his comrades left, Jack immediately hid under a truck. He shot out the tires of the director's car, forcing him and his men to get out and search for him. Little did these assassins know how formidable Jack was in hand-to-hand combat. Meanwhile, his comrades outside, hearing the commotion, came to investigate. But as soon as one of them saw the man lying on the ground, Jack rushed out and delivered a fatal blow. Then, the third man fell. Now, only the director remained. Knowing he was no match for Jack, he fled. Just as Jack was about to close in on the director, he suddenly noticed a helicopter appearing in the sky. Due to the heavy firepower, Jack could only seek cover. Taking advantage of this opportunity, the director ran straight to the helicopter and shouted for the pilot to take off immediately. Seeing this, Jack could only fire a warning shot into the air. However, elsewhere, due to the officer's poor driving skills, he was inadvertently forced to turn onto a dead end by a truck while driving straight. Seeing the assassins pursuing from behind, the officer knew he would not survive this day. So, he instructed the little girl, then used his own body to draw the enemy's fire. But the girl, instead of running away, turned to watch the officer collapse. Fortunately, Negley and the others arrived just in time. Although the girl was saved, Negley realized the officer was beyond saving. In his final moments, he endured the pain and said, "The chief of police is actually the director's mole." He had confessed his crimes to the officer and even tried to recruit him. After saying that, the officer ended his glorious life. The next day, Negley, filled with rage, took Jack to the chief of police's house. At that moment, the chief of police was preparing to pack his bags and flee, completely unaware of what was about to befall him. Seeing Jack at his house, the chief instinctively glanced at the weapon on the table, but it was too late to use it. The chief tried to use all the information he knew to plead for his life. He told Jack that the director was able to send assassins after them because he had leaked information. And the assassin they hid yesterday was actually still alive and in the intensive care unit. The chief thought that after learning all the information, Jack would spare him. Unexpectedly, it only enraged Jack even more. Of course, Jack and his comrades didn't forget about the assassin in the hospital. The two stormed in, threatening him. Bedridden, he couldn't resist. However, the assassin was merely following orders. He didn't possess any useful information. Just when it seemed like the trip had yielded no valuable intel, Jack noticed a doctor acting suspiciously. This was surely someone sent by the director to silence the assassin. Realizing he might have been exposed, the assassin immediately turned and fled down the hallway. Knowing this was a new lead, Jack and Negley pursued the assassin through the hospital. As they rounded a corner, they discovered the assassin had vanished without a trace. Unwilling to let the lead go cold, Jack and Negley split up to search. Negley entered an abandoned operating room, picking up a stick for self-defense. The assassin used a surgical saw to gain the upper hand in a scuffle with Negley. But at the critical moment, Jack rushed in and ended his life. Negley found a cell phone in the assassin's pocket. They immediately called the director. Initially, they planned to threaten him and issue a final warning, but the director remained unfazed. He had captured Jack's 2 other comrades and threatened their lives, forcing Jack and Negley to surrender at his factory. To keep an ace up his sleeve, Jack lied, saying that Negley had died in the previous fight and that he was the only one who could come to the factory. After hanging up, Jack knew the director would soon find out that Negley was still alive. So, he called the senator for help, requesting to borrow his special forces bodyguards. With this powerful support, Jack and Negley arrived at the target factory. Tonight would be a sleepless night. To save his friends, Jack entered the director's factory alone. But as soon as he stepped inside, they confiscated all his weapons and intended to strap him to a gurney, just like O'Donnell. Unexpectedly, despite being tied up, Jack easily overpowered everyone around him, stopping only when they pointed guns at him. The director had discovered that Negley was still alive, and he wouldn't feel safe until he found her. To keep Jack in line, the director began torturing O'Donnell in front of him. He then took out a culture box containing Swan's eyeball and finger. All the documents that needed to be signed had been signed with Swan's name. Even if this was exposed in the future, the police would only pursue a dead man. Listening to the director describe his perfect plan, Jack remained unfazed. Because outside the factory, Negley was ready to counterattack. After taking down 2 guards inside the factory, Negley immediately called for backup from the senator's special forces team. Jack also knew the time had come and quietly used a paperclip hidden under his foot to untie himself. As the special forces team pulled the lever, the entire factory was plunged into darkness. Negley and the special forces began clearing out the mercenaries inside the factory. The director, realizing the situation was dire, took O'Donnell and the others onto his helicopter. To save his comrades, Jack risked his life, jumping onto the helicopter's landing skid. Seeing the helicopter had reached an altitude of thousands of meters, the director ordered his men to open the rear door, intending to throw O'Donnell and dig out of the cabin. No one expected the open door would give Jack the opportunity to crawl into the helicopter. Of course, Jack never lost in a hand-to-hand fight. But unexpectedly, the director's bullet hit the windshield, causing the helicopter to lose balance and tilt backward. Dig almost fell out of the cabin, but Jack managed to grab her in time. At this point, Jack was exhausted, and the director, seeing this, laughed triumphantly. He kicked Jack repeatedly but realized his opponent seemed stuck to the helicopter. Helplessly, he had to call his men to deal with Jack. But he didn't realize that Dig had already freed herself. The director couldn't believe these people were so tenacious. Now, he had run out of escape routes. Remembering his comrades who had been thrown from the helicopter, Jack finally avenged them. And their next goal was to stop AM from selling the missiles to the bad guys. Dig threatened the pilot, forcing him to continue flying to their destination. At this time, AM was still taking his men to the pre-arranged transaction location. As soon as the helicopter door opened, Jack stormed out. Because their transaction had indirectly harmed so many innocent people, Jack listed all of AM's crimes. Faced with solid evidence, AM, showing no remorse, merely claimed he was just a businessman. After finishing everything, Jack and the others went to a nearby warehouse. Since the director had arranged for a scientist to be there beforehand, Jack locked both the pilot and the scientist inside. Considering they had cooperated, Jack decided to spare them this time. As the helicopter slowly took off, Negley fired a rocket, turning it into a ball of fire. However, at this moment, Jack suddenly noticed the senator's special forces team pointing their guns at them. The men smirked. "We can't let you leave this place alive." Unexpectedly, Jack had anticipated this situation for a long time. He had contacted not only the senator but also the Department of Homeland Security. The people who came to help were his brother Joe's colleagues. To apprehend all those involved, Jack used the bodyguard's phone to call the senator. While the senator was caught off guard, the FBI stormed in. After finishing everything, Jack led his team away from the scene. The 2-week battle finally ended with Jack's side victorious, but at a heavy cost. The $65 million left behind by the director for the deal wasn't turned over to the FBI. Instead, Jack distributed it in various ways to the families of his fallen comrades. Francis' wife and children, the officer's younger brother, and Sanchez's fiancée. He even made a large donation to a homeless animal shelter in Swan's name. At the end of the film, Jack and his special investigation team take a picture together on the beach, a perfect snapshot of their camaraderie. The movie concludes with 2 thrilling missions, but Jack's journey continues, promising a new adventure coming soon to theaters.